Ever since I've started playing chess in 2021, I've exclusively played on chess.com. But recently, I thought I would give the next biggest platform a try. So for the past 30 days, I've been playing all of my chess games on Lichess, including all of my studying. In today's video, not only are we going to explore my experience on Lichess, but we're going to answer the age-old question: chess.com or Lichess? We're going to split the video up into separate categories and look at specific features or lack thereof on each platform and rate them 1 through 10. At the end of the video, we'll tally them up and see which platform wins. Let me know in the comments below what you would rate each of these platforms. So let's get into our first category: gameplay. You might be wondering, how can the gameplay differentiate between two chess platforms? Although the differences are minor, when you play thousands of games on a specific platform, they do make a big impact. Let's take a look at the individual gameplay features for both platforms. Pre-moves. The first major difference between chess.com and Lichess is the way that their pre-moves work. On chess.com, you can make an unlimited amount of pre-moves as long as the moves you're making are legal. However, on Lichess, you can only make one single pre-move. The drawback to pre-moves on chess.com is that they take 0.1 seconds to register. So for example, let's say you have 0.6 seconds left on your clock and have pre-moved a forced checkmate in 7, you will run out of time before the checkmate can be put on the board. On Lichess though, pre-moves take no time off your clock. So theoretically, if you can successfully pre-move a checkmate in 7, one move at a time, with 0.6 seconds left on your clock, you would win the game. There is one problem with Lichess's pre-moves though, and in my opinion, it makes chess.com's system a lot better: internet connection. At any given time on Lichess, I have a minimum of 300 ms. This means that information Lichess relays to my computer will take exactly 0.3 seconds, and vice versa, me to Lichess's servers. This doesn't mean that pre-moving a mate in 7 with 0.6 seconds on your clock is impossible, but it does rely on your opponent taking more than 0.3 seconds on each move they make, so the information can be relayed on their clock and not yours. In the circumstances that it would matter, your opponent is probably going to be trying to flag you. And if they pre-move at all themselves, it essentially renders your 0-second pre-moves useless if you don't have a great internet connection. Make no mistake, this is also not a matter of having a good internet connection as opposed to a bad one, but it completely depends on where you live in the world. Lichess's servers are based in France, so anyone that lives directly in Europe is going to have a massive advantage in any time scramble. You might be wondering how chess.com's pre-moves are any better. Well, it's the fact that after the first pre-move, your ping doesn't matter on the following ones. If you have 300 ms, your first move will take 0.4 seconds, and the following ones will take 0.1 each, because the information was relayed from you to chess.com servers all at once, not one at a time. Whilst there may be some advantages to the system that Lichess uses, if it only helps people in one part of the world, it just shouldn't exist in my opinion. And just quickly, before anyone recommends to play with increment, this is not possible at the higher level of the pools. As it stands on chess.com, there are only 3,000 active players higher rated than me and only 1,000 on Lichess. If I start getting too specific with who I can pair with on either of these platforms, for example by adding increment to my games, I just won't pair with anyone. At the upper end of the pool, there are far too few players to play with these specifications. Pairings. The pairings on both chess.com and Lichess, I would say, are just about as good as each other. They both have rating range filters, and although it would be nice to have another filter like account creation date, none of them have it, so they would both score the same. Although chess.com has a much larger player base, it's not really felt as far as pairings go on Lichess. One criticism I have as far as chess.com goes is that players at the upper end of the pool feel very inconsistent in strength. Lichess, on the other hand, feels much more accurate. Of course, chess.com uses Glicko 1 and Lichess uses Glicko 2, which for all purposes of this video, I don't feel makes a massive difference. However, a 2300 player and a 2200 player on chess.com feel identical in playing strength to me. In the same sentence, on Lichess, I feel that there are clear differences between these two elo brackets. 2300s are much more solid and hard to break down, whilst 2200s are still solid but are more prone to mistakes. This isn't to say that Lichess doesn't have inflated inflated or deflated ratings, but generally, when the dust settles and a player has played enough games on their account, I feel that their rating accurately reflects their strength. This is something that I find isn't always the case on chess.com. I believe that this is because of one very obvious problem on chess.com. The cheaters. Extremely solid players lose elo to these cheaters and end up in a lower elo bracket they simply don't belong in. This causes an extremely unusual imbalance of playing strength in the 21, 22, and 2300s of the pool. In a recent video I uploaded, I estimated that around 33% of my opponents at my rating in the chess.com pool were cheating. And in the last 30 days on Lichess, I've played around 100 games around the 2250 bracket. I won't go into too much detail of why, but I genuinely believe I have not versed a single cheater in those 100 games. Whilst other elo brackets are bound to yield different results on Lichess, at my specific rating there seems to be a great honesty policy on Lichess, and I feel like I've versed very few cheaters. Arenas. Whether you play in them or not, arenas are a huge part of the gameplay on any chess website, making them easily the second most popular form of matchmaking aside from the normal pool. The customization for arenas on chess.com and Lichess is great. They have every feature you need, along with gameplay and entry options. One cool feature that Lichess has that chess.com doesn't is the berserk feature. Essentially, if you want to, at any given point, you can take 50% of the time on your clock to gain an extra point if you win that game in the arena. For example, if you're second place in the arena and you really need to catch up, you can take risks by giving away some of your time in order to gain extra points. This is a super cool feature and one that I wish chess.com had. Another thing that Lichess has that chess.com doesn't is the ability to change arena presets during the waiting period for the arena to start. For example, if the time control is 3+0 and a countdown for the start of the arena has already begun, but you accidentally made it rated when you didn't want to, you can change that. However, on chess.com, you would need to cancel the arena entirely, make a new one and make it unrated, and then have everyone join all over again. Another frustrating thing about chess.com is that you cannot physically remove someone from an arena even if you are the club admin that the arena is being hosted by. So for example, if you are playing in an arena and somebody else is blatantly cheating in that arena, you can kick them from the club, but they are allowed to play out the remainder of the arena and there is absolutely no way to get rid of them. The only way to get rid of them is if chess.com actively bans their account during the arena. On Lichess, if you have created a team-only arena and somebody is cheating in it, kicking them from the team will kick them from the arena. Miscellaneous. There are also a few miscellaneous features that are worth mentioning, all of which belong to Lichess. On chess.com, if someone mouse slips and it completely turns the course of the game, there is absolutely no way to demonstrate fair play apart from offering a draw. However, in a lot of cases, offering a draw isn't appropriate. For example, if you have a small positional advantage, you should be playing for the win. On Lichess, a player can simply request a takeback. If the other player wants to, they can accept it and allow the player to move again. This feature actually does exist on chess.com, but only in custom variants and not in rated play. Another cool feature on Lichess is the ability to choose whether or not threefold repetition is claimed automatically. In over-the-board chess, if threefold repetition occurs and isn't claimed, if the position does not repeat on the fourth move, a draw cannot be claimed by either side unless both agree to it. Lichess also offers voice activation, which is super cool for blindfold chess and anyone with movement impairment that wants to play chess on the platform. Lichess also supports keyboard activations, so writing moves with the touch of a keyboard actually plays them on the board, which could be useful again for blindfold chess or anyone visually impaired. Overall, on the gameplay side of things, I think it's fairly even. Whilst Lichess's pre-moves in my opinion are really bad, they make up for it in a lot of other areas like the absence of cheaters and a few cool features that chess.com simply doesn't have. Of course, my experience with cheaters on either website will not mirror that of anyone that isn't my elo. But if I'm rating these things on my experiences on both platforms, I would give chess.com a 7 out of 10 and Lichess an 8 out of 10. Analysis. For the analysis section, we're going to be looking at a range of different things, not just the analysis boards, but anything that could be considered an extension of it. But first, let's look specifically at the analysis board. Both Lichess and Chess.com give you a decent amount of choice in terms of which engine you'd prefer to use. Whilst Lichess only gives you the options of Stockfish editions, Chess.com allows engines like Torch or Komodo as well. There is also a great amount of customization depending on your internet and hardware limitations on both platforms. You can adjust the depth of the engine, how many lines it comes up with, and even how much time the engine sits and calculates a position. Lichess has a few less customization options, but they're really not missing anything massively important. Realistically, a more than adequate analysis can be undertaken on both platforms. One cool feature that Lichess offers that Chess.com doesn't is their Show Threat feature. When you click it, it shows what your opponent is threatening to play if you don't stop it, or if you don't give them something better to play on the next move. This is super useful when trying to understand why the engine evaluates something as it does and helps for your overall analysis. Lichess and Chess.com also give you live win percentages for masters to other players on the platform and your own games based on what has been put on the board so far. For example, after e4, e5, it will tell you that 30% of the games are won with white, 51% are drawn, and 19% are lost. This is super useful, especially when you're building an opening repertoire. Game review. Lichess doesn't have a game review function beyond their initial analysis board, but in the case of Chess.com, that's not necessarily a bad thing. First of all, Chess.com's game review function and their analysis function work off two separate engines. So whilst the game review might tell you that you played the best move, you might have actually played the third best move in the position. Whilst you might not think this is a big deal, when you're making an opening repertoire, making sure that you're memorizing the top engine move and not the third top engine move is very important. Whilst you should be looking through all of the moves and understanding why some are good and why some are less good, I can see this being very confusing for beginner players. Although Chess.com does specify when something was a book move, its opening tree is rather shallow, and unless you're playing something extremely mainline, this won't matter. On the other hand, Chess.com's progress bar is quite cool. Seeing how the game progressed over time according to the overall evaluation is a really interesting and informative addition to the game review that I wish Lichess had. Although you might argue its usefulness, it certainly helps put the game into perspective and visualize the dominance or lack thereof of any game. However, if we're being critical, I really dislike the performance rating given in the game review. This is because it seems to be incredibly biased depending on the user's rating and ends up being very inaccurate. For example, here's a game I played in the pool versus a 2,292 rated player. My performance rating for this game was 2,450 and my opponent's was 2,150. However, if we put the blank PGN into a separate game review and disregard our starting ratings, it refuses to give us a performance rating anymore because it mainly relies on knowing the ratings of both players beforehand. The game review then combines the ratings with the move accuracy and gives you a number. It's important to note that this is not how performance ratings work over the board. In a real game, the rating of your opponent will be taken into account and the result of the game. The move accuracy is irrelevant. This allows for an accurate performance rating based on the players that you beat over a tournament. However, in a setting where you will only be paired against players your own strength, it would be incredibly boring if Chess.com just said your performance rating was your current ELO. So with this being said, Chess.com massively boosts your performance rating by making the move accuracy matter. This gives you a completely unrealistic number that you are certainly not the strength of. You might be thinking that this feature is not important at all, but in my opinion, it's terrible to be teaching beginner chess players that they are much better than they are. It only creates confusion when these beginner players can't achieve their completely unrealistic goals. Other than that, the clear and renowned move notations provided by Chess.com's game review are fantastic. I really think that Lichess should consider adding a move accuracy feature to their game review, as I often find myself plugging in Lichess games to the Chess.com game review just to find out what the move accuracy was. Study. Lichess's study feature is absolutely perfect in my opinion. The only problem that I've ever had with it is that sometimes when two people are looking at the same study, there can be syncing issues, which means that both players aren't seeing the same moves on the board at the same time. But other than that, I wouldn't change a thing. Chess.com does have a library feature, which is similar to a study, but it's completely personal and you cannot share it with friends and view it simultaneously. You have to manually give them the PGN to show them a position in your library. Chess.com does have a classroom feature, which is super cool, but the classroom feature is just a bad version of Lichess's study feature. It boasts all the same qualities, except you can't save a classroom once it has concluded unless you physically download the contents of it. With a Lichess study, if you don't get to finish looking at at it, you can close it and come back to it another time, but with a classroom, once you leave, it's gone forever. Both Lichess and Chess.com do have options to comment on specific parts of the game, but Chess.com's lack of collaborative features in their study means that apart from strictly personal use, it's entirely useless. Overall, I think that Lichess comes out on top in the analysis section. Whilst Chess.com's game review feature is very cool, apart from the progress bar and the move accuracy, I don't feel any of it is particularly useful, and I feel like it's a massive novelty. Lichess's analysis board is slightly better than Chess.com's, and Lichess's study feature is miles clear of any of Chess.com's attempts to recreate it. If I had to choose between a handful of cool features on Chess.com's game review and Lichess's study feature, I would choose the latter 100 times out of 100. Chess.com doesn't score badly here though, but Lichess certainly scores higher. For me, Chess.com gets an 8 out of 10, whilst Lichess gets a 9 out of 10. Puzzles. Puzzles are a huge part of chess and a big part of improving too. We've been composing puzzles since 1845, and we've been taking positions from real games to study well before that. There's a few main differences between puzzles on Lichess and Chess.com. Let's explore them. The selection. Chess.com handpicks all of their puzzles. Some are taken from real games, and some are composed puzzles that have been uniquely created. Whilst this does ensure that every puzzle is useful, insightful, and of high quality, it also means that Chess.com has far less puzzles than Lichess. Lichess boasts up to 4 million unique puzzles on their platform, whilst Chess.com has somewhere in the region of 100,000. This is because Lichess uses an algorithm to make their puzzles. First, the algorithm chooses a game that was played on Lichess. Then it finds an interesting position in the game where the player needs to find an interesting tactical or positional sequence to take the advantage. It then puts that position into its pool of puzzles, determines the difficulty of the puzzle by how many players solve it easily or have difficulty with it, and by repeating this process, Lichess has over 4 million puzzles in their pool. You might think that this is overkill, but I assure you that it's not. For example, let's look at the puzzle ratings on Chess.com. In particular, we can look at puzzles rated 3,500 ELO or above. There are only around 2,000 puzzles in this particular bracket. This means that any avid puzzle solver at this level would have to play 5 puzzles per day for an entire year to start seeing repeated puzzles at their level. At a certain point, the puzzles become less about calculation and more about memory. This is why you see so many players on Chess.com with incredibly high puzzle ratings. It's also why people have very high Puzzle Rush survival scores. I can attest to this myself because my highest score is 306, whilst Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura's is only 114. After around the 65th puzzle in any Puzzle Rush streak, the puzzles are only rated 3,500 and above. And if you can just memorize 2,000 puzzles, you can essentially get an infinite score. Eventually, the same thing will apply to 3-minute streaks and 5-minute streaks. Top players will only have to memorize around 10,000 puzzles for the streaks to be completely based off memory and not calculation after the 30th puzzle. The same is not possible on Lichess. There are far too many puzzles for any human to feasibly remember. Multiple choice puzzles. Another negative thing about Chess.com's puzzles is sometimes they're just wrong. Not only is there a non-0% chance the solution to your puzzle will actually be to find a draw, but sometimes there will be multiple correct answers in your puzzle, but Chess.com will only recognize one of them as correct. This is because when the puzzles are hand-picked, sometimes there are errors and faulty puzzles are put into the pool. On Lichess, even if this does happen, there can be multiple correct answers to any of their puzzles. If one move delivers mate in 2 and another line delivers mate in 5, both of them are correct and you won't fail the puzzle if you choose a longer mate. Generally speaking, I don't think the puzzles on these websites should hold too much weight. But in the same sentence, I don't think these differences warrant too much of a variation between their ratings anyway. Both websites have great puzzle systems, and even though Chess.com has a few flaws, they're only really noticeable if you're a lot higher rated. For puzzles, I'll give Chess.com a 7 out of 10 and Lichess an 8 out of 10. User interface. It is no secret that Chess.com absolutely wipes the floor with Lichess when it comes to the UI and aesthetic customization. Let's take a look at Chess.com and Lichess individually as opposed to comparing them simultaneously. Chess.com's layout is great. Whilst playing a game, the board is located centrally, with the game information being displayed to the right, an option Lichess utilizes as well. Very importantly, interactive options are abundantly clear when looking at chess.com's UI. The clocks are well placed on a contrasting background, usernames and ratings are displayed clearly, and the navigation to your opponent's profile is convenient. As soon as your game reaches a result, you're met with a bright green button that begins the analysis. All of the less popular features, like the button to flip the board, adding the game to your library, and adding a comment on the game, are tucked away in the corner and aren't made to be eyesores. Whilst the UI encourages game analysis, a smaller and still obvious button is shown just below for players to begin a new game. On other pages of the website, not only is the coloring absolutely perfect, but the information is laid out perfectly. For example, the player profile page. Account information is displayed neatly at the top of the screen, time control ratings on the right, with recent games being shown all through the middle. Various drop-downs are also available for players to display more information. In general, the page is not overcrowded and is extremely user-friendly. I also much prefer the taskbar being located on the left side of the screen. Because most pages on chess.com require you to scroll vertically, the permanence of the taskbar being on the side allows much smoother navigation on the website as the space on the page is being used efficiently. Chess.com also allows major customizations to how your experience looks. You can change the background of all your chess.com pages, there is an extremely wide range of board themes, piece themes, and even sound packages. Unique piece animation styles are also offered to users, along with flares that can be displayed next to their name. Lichess, on the other hand, is much less user-friendly in my opinion. Unlike chess.com, the board is located in the center of the screen, with game information being displayed to the right. However, one of the most important pieces of game information, the notations, are crammed into an extremely small window which needs to be scrolled to actually see more than 3 moves. Not only that, but I also missed the fact that they have their own version of the game review for literally 30 days straight because it's tucked away in the bottom corner. You have to scroll down to find it, and considering how useful it actually is, it should be a lot more apparent. If only there was some space on the left side of the screen to put such an important feature. The entire left-hand side of the screen seems to be filler to me. In the top left, it displays the time control, which is useful, but it also just shows the usernames of both players, which was already displayed on the right information panel. Buttons on Lichess also feel unnecessarily clunky. For example, the rematch button, once you've finished a game, is way bigger than it needs to be. It's around 10 times longer horizontally than it is vertically, and just doesn't need to take up as much space as it does. It then has a massively oversized game chat that in over 100 games on Lichess I have used maybe once, with a taskbar being located along the top of the page as opposed to the left of it. The taskbar would make much more sense on the left of the screen, allowing for a taller view of the Lichess page should the top taskbar be removed. The default color scheme is extremely dull, and although there are customization options to change this, they are quite limited and don't feel all too different from one another. Lichess seems to be afraid of things being too noticeable on their website. For example, the clocks should be way more visible than they are. For whatever reason, it's a very murky white on a dull grey background. When you get into low time, a small red tint lights up behind your time. One thing that Lichess has that I like is the red glow around the king whenever it's put into check, but apart from that, they don't really offer anything that chess.com doesn't. Whilst the website can be easily navigated, it's certainly the weakest point. I can say from experience, the sole reason I started playing on chess.com as opposed to Lichess was because of the UI. It's simply awful on Lichess, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was the driving factor to most players choosing chess.com over Lichess other than the pricing. The UI is what really lets Lichess down in my opinion, and chess.com is taking some big points here. Not only is the layout poor on Lichess, but the color scheme is extremely dull as well. I don't know if the intention is to not take the attention off the board in the center, but in my opinion, they've got it completely wrong here. For chess.com, I'm going to give what I feel is an extremely fair 10 out of 10. Their UI is absolutely perfect in my opinion, and this is where they really excel. Lichess, on the other hand, is let down massively here, and I'll give them a 6 out of 10. Overall, out of 40 points, chess.com scores a solid 32 out of 40, whilst Lichess scores a healthy 31 out of 40. Whether or not you guys think certain categories should hold as much weight as the others is completely up to you, but in my opinion, Lichess scored admirably against chess.com here. Another thing that I didn't mention was that we are scoring for a full diamond membership experience on chess.com here. Of course, Lichess is completely free, so factor that in however you see fit. But for the purposes of this video, I couldn't figure out a fair way to compare the two websites if we were disregarding all of chess.com's paid features. I should also mention that I specifically left out any community categories because I feel that 30 days on Lichess is completely insufficient to have any idea of how to accurately rate it. In all honesty, apart from my communities on Twitch and YouTube, I don't really participate in any chess.com community activities either, so I felt that it was just best to skip that category. It's also important to note that the ratings in this video are specifically related to playing chess on these two platforms. Even though chess.com has massive events like the Speed Chess Championship, I felt that it was unrelated for all purposes of this video. Other than that, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Please remember that whilst I have spent over 3 years playing on chess.com, I do have very limited experience playing on Lichess. There are definitely things that I would change my mind on if I had played on Lichess for a year instead of just 1 month. This video is also not meant to criticize either of these platforms. The idea is to simply outline where each platform excels and fall behinds to help new players make a choice on which platform is best for them. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about both platforms, and other than that, I'll see you all in the next video.